I'm on the National Board of Common Cause, and I'm supposed to be down in Washington, D.C. for a board meeting. And then I hear what's happening. Bill Clinton is coming to New Hampshire. Newt Gingrich is coming to New Hampshire. And they're going to meet together to talk in Sullivan County at the Earl Borden Center. And I'm like, wow. So I call my board and I say, I'm not coming down to the board meeting. And they say, why not? I said, I want to see if I can do something with the two biggest egos on the planet being in the state of New Hampshire. Let's see if we can get them to focus on money and politics and political reform. And they go, Arnie, how the heck are you going to do that? I said, I don't know, but I know I won't be able to do it if I'm in Washington, but I have a better chance of doing it if I'm in New Hampshire. So here's what happened, everyone. You're going to love this story. So I happen to know the head of one of the county commissioners in Sullivan County. His son was my field director when I ran for Congress. So I called Anthony up and I said, Anthony, can we talk to your dad? I want to know if he's going to go to the event in Sullivan County when Bill and Newt are going to be speaking. He said, sure, not a problem. So it's the night before the event, and I go and I meet with Mr. McConnell, and I ask him, are you going to go? He said, oh, absolutely. Are you going to try to ask a question? Absolutely. I said, what are you thinking about asking them? And here's the story that is both emotional and you will get. He's dying of cancer, everyone. And when he dies, his wife will lose insurance. So, of course, he wants to talk about health care and what happened to Hillary Care. And I said, oh, God, Mr. McConnell, I totally understand that question. But you know why we don't get health care reform, don't you? It's because about the influence of money. It's the pharmaceutical companies and the insurance companies and the medical community that doesn't want reform. And they are the moat between fixing the system and actually getting something that really will make a difference. Would you consider asking a question about money and politics? And he gets really gruff with me. He goes, I want to ask that healthcare question. I want to ask that healthcare question. And I said, I get it. But understand why we don't get what you so desperately need. So here's what happens, everyone. And I have the New York Times article with me. Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich are sitting, and they're both giving their talk. And after they both give their talk, and it's kind of a kumbaya moment, they then open it up for questions. I'm driving in my car, listening to New Hampshire Public Radio, doing the conversation live. Guess who is the first person to be called on by the moderator? Mr. McConnell. I went nuts. I pulled off to the side of the road, and I started doing my Hail Marys. And what happens? He starts the question by asking about health care. But here is the end of the question. It is my understanding, Mr. President, that the reason why we can't get health care reform is because of the money in the system that prevents it. I start to cry. Bill Clinton is the first one to respond. He only hears the health care question. And this is the part that will blow your mind. Newt Gingrich then stands up and says, Mr. President, you didn't hear his whole question. He asked about money and politics. Now, here's the New York Times story. I will read you just the first two sentences, and then I'm going to toss to this man. The only new idea in Sunday's agreeable, if somewhat artificial exchange of pleasantries between President Clinton and House Speaker Newt Gingrich came from a New Hampshire senior citizen who suggested a blue ribbon commission on political reform and campaign finance reform. Mr. Clinton said he would accept the idea in a heartbeat. Mr. Gingrich concurred. The two shook hands on the deal. 1995, nothing happened. No commission, no movement. For almost a year, they followed them. You know why you're important? Words are cheap, but actions matter. And now we're in 2016, and I want to ask Hedrick Smith, this amazing Pulitzer Prize winning Emmy Award winner who's written books, who's been a New York Times writer, who's been on Frontline, who just wrote a book called Who Stole the American Dream? Why in 1995 they shook hands. They said, this is a problem. We've got to fix it. They did nothing. They did nothing. And in 2016, we're in a swamp of cash, and the system has gotten worse. So, my great Hedrick Smith, I want to know about the arc from 95 to 2016. Explain to us how the system has maybe devolved, but more importantly, how it can evolve.
Well, first of all, I thought you were going to ask me if it was any different today.
That too.
Yeah. And the answer is, it is different, and it's different because of the people in this room. I want to take my hat off to you. Before I go on, I really want to talk about the difference between then and now. But let me just congratulate New Hampshire Rebellion, Open Democracy, Dan Weeks, Gordy Allen, all of you here. This is my third visit, third year in a row coming up to join you. And I think what you're doing is wonderful. And it isn't just wonderful. It is the difference. Listen to what you've heard in the last couple of hours.
It is the difference, absolutely.
Listen to what you just heard 12 minutes ago. A woman telling you that in the state of Arizona, which is not one of the states that you would imagine would be in the forefront of political reform in this country, they've got 2 ballot initiatives, one to fix primaries and one to make open disclosure of funding. Now, I know Gordy Allen, good friend, former singer in the Williams College E-flats, former representative in the New Hampshire House, and a bunch of other people are working on a disclosure law here in New Hampshire. It is critical. It is critical. They need backing. They need pressure on the legislature. They need good language. But if a state like Arizona can put that on the ballot, and let me give you another one. Montana this last year passed a better open disclosure law on dark money in campaigns than we have on the federal books. California, maybe. Montana and Arizona. Listen, guys, if they can do it out there, you can do it here. That's the difference. The difference between today and 1995, when Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich shook hands and then forgot about the deal, is that people are now engaged. What we're seeing in this campaign with Bernie and with Trump, regardless of all the ridiculous things that Trump has said, is an uprising of people saying we're fed up with a broken political system, we want action. You can't trust the politicians. We can't trust a Clinton. We can't trust a Gingrich. You can't, I'm sorry, I thought Cory Booker was brilliant, but even Cory Booker needs the firm hand of democracy at his back to say, let's move it. And we've got to make it go across the aisle. It's not going to work if only Democrats are involved. So the difference today, to me, is that this year in Illinois, there's a petition movement to drive gerrymander reform. This year in Arizona, disclosure. This year in Washington State, a push to a popular vote to amend the Constitution. What's happening is the people are starting to wake up. They realize Washington is broken. Washington is not going to fix it. It is up to us. It is up to places like this tent, we the people, the convention. That's the difference. People are now starting to get engaged.
So I need to ask you a question, because I always remember that famous statement by Senator Dick Durbin right after the 2008 economic meltdown. And what I remember, Hedrick, is that when he watched what happened when he walked into Congress, he was so angry. He said, the banks own this place. That's what he said.
What he actually said was the banks still own this. After the collapse, he said the banks still own this place.
So do you think that situation, when we bailed out Wall Street and left Main Street on its own and abandoned people, started giving us the opportunity to sort of feed the storyline you and I have both known for so long, and now it's really made people more wake up and realize there is a connection with the failure of the system and money in the system?
Well, I just noticed the other day, I don't know if people saw this story, there's a company called Johnson Controls.
Yeah.
And they make about half of the automobile batteries, believe it or not. They don't just make, they make They make air conditioning and heating. That's HVAC systems, but they make automobile batteries.
Right.
So if we go back to that earlier period, they're up on their hands and knees, praying and begging to Congress in 2009, 2010, bail out the auto industry. Okay? Johnson Controls, when GM and Ford and Chrysler got their bailouts, Johnson Controls made at least $100 million out of the bailout. At least.
At least. Lots
of profits, but they got direct money because the auto companies owed them that much. Then 2 years later, they got a $300 million grant from the Obama administration to explore advanced batteries. Okay?
Okay.
So there are $400 million of taxpayer money has gone to help this company out. Last week, Johnson Controls said, we're going to merge with a foreign company. We're going to give up our American citizenship. We're going to become a foreign company because we can get out of American taxes. We can make more profits, so we can turn more over to. So wait a second. We bailed them out. We helped them out, and they're walking out.
Exactly.
It's just come on. I mean, this stinks, right?
Right.
People are starting to wake up to that, and I think people. But can we get Congress back? We're only going to get Congress back if we do the things that this movement is. I mean, you listen to what happened in Connecticut. A woman was up here on a panel, 2 panels, 3 panels ago. She's talking about public financing in Connecticut. What's interesting to me is if you talk to Connecticut legislators, and I've talked to some of them, they will tell you the whole atmosphere, the whole environment for dealing with policy issues in the Connecticut legislature has been changed by public financing because the lobbyists no longer have the hook on them. Johnson Controls no longer, and companies like it, no longer is pumping money into places like that. And so you get better government when you get control of money in politics.
We know there's a topic I know is near and dear to your heart because I heard you go, yes, when they mentioned the term gerrymandering. And it was like, oh my God, heartthrob for Hedrick Smith. And I think you need to connect what's going on with gerrymandering and why in some ways it's bastardized the system even more because people are thinking about money, but look what money has done to the districts, which has really made the system that much worse.
Well, you had a situation, I think, here in New Hampshire a couple of years ago when the governor was talking about Medicaid expansion.
Right.
And there was a bipartisan panel, Republicans and Democrats, senators and members of the House that came out, both parties in favor of Medicaid expansion. When it happened, I'm told that some very big Republican funders, including Americans for Prosperity, told a couple of the Republican legislators that if they didn't reverse their position, they would face opposition in their primaries in the next election. And that's possible. That money is very powerful in gerrymandered districts because those are heavily Republican districts. If they were more fairly gerrymandered, more fairly redistricted, they might be, excuse me.
It's a Freudian
That's
slip.
the kind of Freudian slip you don't want in front of a bunch of politically savvy people.
Yeah.
If you had them more fairly district, it probably wouldn't have the same effect. Those people actually changed their position within 48 hours. Today, in America, if you talk to a good political correspondent for any good publication or network, they can tell you the partisan outcome of the congressional races in about 88% of the districts in America, because 88% of the districts in America, congressional districts, 435 members of the House, 88% of them, close to 90%, are gerrymandered by one party or the other. And there's no party contest. The only contest that takes place is in the primary election, which, by the way, disenfranchises the independent voters she was talking about.
Right.
So here in this state, you only have 2 congressional districts. Pretty hard to gerrymander, but you've got a heavily gerrymandered state legislature.
Yep.
You need to think about it. If you go to Washington, what you have is people on extremes at both ends. You have both parties playing at both ends of the field, and you got nobody playing in midfield. You can't get any legislation passed.
Let me just remind everyone about the gerrymandered districts, where there are districts that are the Hispanic district, the Black district, the Republican district, the Democratic district. What do we know about voter turnout in primaries? It sucks. So you have voter turnout that's like 16% and 20%.
Whoa, 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 whoa. There are lots of districts in which the primary turnout is 4 or 5%.
Okay.
Wait.
Oh,
Let me
okay.
give you one more. Ted Cruz
Yeah.
won the Republican primary in
Yeah.
Texas and became the senator of Texas
Yeah.
with a 2% turnout. 600,000 voters out of 27 million made this man
okay.
a senator and now a candidate for president.
But the reason I'm telling you this, I mean, thank you for the 2%. I was giving them a little more democracy by 15. But what does that tell you? It tells you how cheap it is to buy that primary.
That's
when
the
you're
point.
talking about 2% of the vote, you're talking about probably knowing every name individually, and you can give them a car and get them to the polls. So the problem is people don't even know that the general election has no meaning. That the only election that matters is the primary. The primary was really jiggered so that it would always be the same result, and therefore the threat to anyone who doesn't walk lockstep with whatever the reactionary conservative they want in that seat, or the reactionary whatever it is, they get to control. It is so not about democracy. It is so not about you. So
Wait.
gerrymandering is so
It's central.
evil. It's central.
Listen to what
Absolutely.
you just heard
Oh.
from her. But Cory Booker said if you want to fix the political system, you're going to have to fix gerrymandering along with money. Okay?
You have
He
to.
put that together. This young lady who just spoke about the independent voter said you need to fix primary as well as money problems in the structures of our system, and you're hearing you need to hook gerrymandering in. And what's very interesting is people think, oh, gerrymandering, Constitution, impossible, can't do it. Do you know that today, in 21 out of our 50 states, there has either been a gerrymander reform, there is a movement for gerrymander reform, or there are law cases brought against the gerrymandering that already exists. Take the state of Florida. State of Florida, back in 2010, when it was electing a Republican legislature, a Republican governor passed a constitutional amendment to the Florida Constitution that said you cannot do any redistricting in the state of Florida that favors one party over the other and protects incumbents. The Republican governor, the Republican legislature paid no attention to that. They did a whopping gerrymander right after that. League of Women Voters, Common Cause brought lawsuit, came up in the 2014 election. They began to tinker with it. The lawsuit went to the Florida Supreme Court. The Supreme Court of Florida has ordered the redistricting of about half of the districts in the state of Florida, and it is pretty clear that it's already happened. In the next election, at least 2, 3, 4 districts are going to change as a result of citizen action. Citizen action in the state of Florida. It can be done. You can do it here.
And I also want to say that what is so amazing to me is to hear what's happening at this presidential campaign. And I watched on TV while you were there, and the first words out of Bernie, it's not a support of Bernie, but the first words out were campaign finance reform.
Yes.
This is a presidential candidate. I mean, the one thing that is so amazing now is now we have an echo chamber. For those of us who've been fighting for this for so long, it never seemed to trickle up. We never got attention. Candidates didn't care what we said. And all of a sudden this year, you are seeing an opportunity to take what you believe in and to keep pushing it. I mean, there's such a trifecta here. I keep saying the trifecta in a bizarre way includes Pope Frank. I mean, even in a bizarre way, even the Pope is helping us on this issue because he is talking not just about money and politics, but he understands about the rot in the system. I think that's so important. It is an opportunity. Your voices are being heard. They're being elevated. Issues like gerrymandering is beginning to resonate. It is now not some la-la idea. It's an idea that's central to people's ability to find the work they need, the infrastructure they need, the healthcare they need, and the Wall Street change that must come. And this is a time. It is our time. Oh, my God. You have to be so excited, Hedrick.
Yeah, well, it's unbelievable. She was right. I was sitting there last night at the Democratic session at the Verizon Center, and when Bernie started in talking about reform, and the first thing was campaign finance reform. He wasn't even talking about the minimum wage or doing something about Wall Street, all those things he said. But the first thing out of his mouth about his platform was campaign finance reform. It is taking off, ladies and gentlemen. It is taking off, and you got to believe in it. And I mean, you're here, you believe in it, but you got to help others believe in it to make it happen. We can get somewhere in this country now. It is moving. I got to go back. I got to go back to Martin Luther King. Can I go back to Martin Luther King?
You have my permission.
Okay, all right. I used to cover the civil rights movement in the South for the New York Times, and that caused me to meet John Lewis and Martin Luther King and trot around with them and watch their demonstrations and whatnot. And everywhere you'd go, Birmingham, Alabama, Albany, Georgia, Jackson, Mississippi, wherever, Gadsden, all kinds of places that were heavily segregationist, people would get up and they'd say, this Martin Luther King, he's just coming in, he's an outside agitator, he's stirring up our people, our niggers, are the terrible word they use. Our people are happy. He's just stirring them up. And then I'd go to these church meetings afterwards, where King would appear, be a crowd there, and hear how he would respond to that. I wondered how King was going to respond to that epithet they threw at him. He's an outside agitator. And what he said was, yes, he said, I am an agitator. He said, look inside your washing machine. When you got your dirty clothes inside your washing machine, he said, in there, he said, there's an agitator that's going back and forth, and it's knocking the dirt out of your clothes. He said, that's what I'm doing. I'm an outside agitator in here, agitating against the dirt, against the segregation, against Jim Crow, against all the filth in our society, and get rid of it. What we need today is a new generation of agitators. What we got right here in this tent is the makings of the army of a new generation of agitators. All right. Okay.
And this is not, and you heard speaker after speaker, this is not a left-right conversation, everyone. It is not a left-right conversation. You know what we really are? We're the radical middle. That's what we are. We're the radical middle. Both sides get that there's something wrong with the system. Both sides understand there's a quid pro quo with money. Both sides get it. The question is, one side misdirects the anger, and the other side has been failing to talk to it. So guess what? Now is the time. And you are so important. The reason I told the story in the beginning from 1995 with my New York Times story is what happened after that handshake was we weren't there. We weren't there to push. We weren't there to repeat. There weren't enough of us saying, where's the damn commission? There weren't enough of us that said there is a problem with the system. Politicians don't work in isolation. And if they know you are watching, and if they know you are out there, and if they know you are agitating, and you want that change, it makes it easier for them to actually follow through. Did you know about the handshake? Probably not. If there was a handshake today, would you know? Absolutely.
Let me just support what Arnie just said. Let me just give you a few numbers. When she says it's across the board, these are not partisan issues. I told you about Florida passing a constitutional amendment. It had to pass by more than 60%. Florida is a state like New Hampshire, roughly 30% Republicans, 30% Democrats, and 40% independents. If you're going to get 60% of the vote, you got to get across the board. In Colorado, when they passed a resolution, a referendum, calling for a constitutional amendment to roll back Citizens United, it passed by 74%. It passed in every single county of the state with a large majority. Red counties, purple counties, blue counties. In Montana, 73% of the vote across the board. The answer is, at the grassroots, among ordinary people across the country, there's remarkable unanimity that the political system is broken, that it's got to be fixed, that Washington is not going to fix it, the professional politicians are not going to fix it, it's up to us. And that's the great thing about the New Hampshire Rebellion. It's built on that principle, started by Granny D.
And I need to go, but I just want to say one thing because I see the woman behind me. In 1999, I read a little squib in the Keene Sentinel. Octogenarian thinks she's going to walk across the country to talk about campaign finance reform. And I went, whoa, look at this story. So I called Granny D up. I'm doing morning drive time radio from 6 to 9 in Nashua, New Hampshire. I said, excuse me, Mrs. Hedrick, would you like to come on the air with me and talk about your idea? And so she said, I'd love to. So I get to my radio station, everyone, at 5:30 a.m. And as I'm coming into the driveway, there is someone sitting on the steps of my radio station. It's a little lady with a hat. And I go, excuse me? And she said, hi, I'm Doris Haddock. I'm here for the interview. I said, Doris, I was going to call you on the phone. And then I said, what are you doing here? It's 5:30 in the morning. And here's what she said. My son says that I have to get used to walking early in the morning when there's no heat, so I will not be exposed to the sun. So we're starting to practice, and I'm practicing with you. That was the first interview she did. I was so out of my mind when we got done. I was so inspired. I called my friend at National Public Radio, and I begged him to interview her. Yes, sure, Arnie. Yes, sure, Arnie. Yes, sure, Arnie. When she ended up in Washington, D.C. with John McCain under one arm and Feingold on the other, I called him back and I said, yes, sure, Arnie. Yes, sure, Arnie. Yes! I got to go, you guys. Thank you. Finish.
And Arnie herself is going to walk across the country 2 or 3 times, back and forth. You believe it. She's running up there to get the Wall Street Journal after having done C-SPAN radio this morning and join me. You know, I can hardly see any of you, but maybe the thing to do would be to open this up to questions, see whether or not some people have got some questions or comments about what's going on in other parts of the country. I have a website that I hope you'll visit, reclaimtheamericandream.org, reclaimtheamericandream.org. I mention that simply because if you want to know about disclosure of dark money, if you want to know about amending the Constitution, if you want to know about gerrymander reform, if you want to know about where there's effective public campaign funding, which John Rao and his group were talking about, we have maps of the country. We have lists of state-by-state rundowns. You've got information there that you can get, groups you can turn to, readings you can get. And we certainly have New Hampshire Rebellion and the Open Democracy.
It is a great website worth checking out. Also, Hedrick Smith's book, which has been mentioned.
Who Stole the American Dream?
I think we have some copies of that at the back as well. We have time for a couple of short statements and then give you a closing if we can. So just any quick hands, a minute or less, any thoughts or questions, and then we'll have Hedrick close it out. Ginny.
How democratic are the caucuses?
You mean the Iowa caucuses? You're going to have to say a little bit more. How democratic?
Are caucuses in general?
Yeah, caucuses in general are, if they're large enough, and you got pretty good sized turnout in Iowa, they're democratic in the sense of giving people a voice. And they're democratic also in the sense of people having to get involved. I mean, it's not like going to a ballot and just casting your vote and then walking away. You do have to stand in line, talk to your neighbors, that kind of stuff. But you've got to get actively involved. And most of the caucuses in Iowa, the ones that I've gone to in years past, usually somebody on behalf of each of the candidates stands up and makes a pitch for that candidate. So you actually have a little bit of a political argument going on. Yeah, I mean, it's a very democratic, small d democratic process.
Thanks, Hedrick. Another question here, and just before we take it, I want to public service announcement. I'm glad there's a lot of mingling happening in the back, but we do want to make sure everybody can hear. So folks at the back, if you could either step outside and enjoy some sunshine or take it down a little bit, that would be helpful. Another question.
Oh, just a comment. I'm Max Abramson. I'm a state representative. We have the GMO labeling bill coming up this Wednesday. We're going to have, of course, a floor fight, a bipartisan floor fight. And, of course, Monsanto and the other big companies have put a lot of money into fighting it. But New Hampshire is one of the last states in New England that doesn't have a GMO labeling law.
Can you give us the bill number if citizens want to get out on that issue?
I've actually forgotten the bill number.
I do that all the time.
I've got 50.
But the hearing is this Wednesday morning in Concord at the legislature.
It's probably going to be late afternoon or evening, but it's at the State House. It's going to be on the House floor where we debate it. We've got several speakers lined up to speak in favor of the bill, and we're going to try and overturn the committee's recommendation.
Thank you, Representative Abramson.
Dan, can you get Gordy Allen, can you get a mic to Gordy Allen and see if he can just say a word or two about the disclosure bill that he's trying to work on and promote?
You know, your timing is impeccable because that's coming right up next, our State Solutions panel. So I don't know if you have any comments on GMO labeling.
No, I don't. No.
All right, we'll take one last comment or question. We'll take two real quick.
Hi, I'm Brian Tilton. I'm the Republican Outreach Coordinator for New Hampshire Rebellion. And I just want to point out that on the redistricting, the gerrymandering, and as well as fixing the money, very important. Governor Larry Hogan of Maryland got elected Republican governor in a more than 2-to-1 Democrat state. His top polling issue right now is his efforts to end gerrymandering in the most gerrymandered state in the country. So this is the #1 issue. 71% of the people support his efforts to have a public commission draw the congressional boundaries over the politicians doing it. So it can be done, as you cited in the Florida example, and it's going to be done in Maryland.
I couldn't thank you more for bringing that up, because there are a lot of people who think that gerrymandering is primarily an issue of Democrats against Republican gerrymandering in Republican-dominated states, and Hogan is the guy who's leading the fight in his state. A Democratic, it is a heavily gerrymandered state, and Hogan is leading the way, and there are court cases challenging the gerrymandering in Maryland, and that underlines what Arnie said before. This is not a partisan issue. It's an issue of the people versus the politicians.
Thanks, Hedrick. And we have time for one last question. And before I give the mic to Kath, I just want to say this lady, Kath Allen, has been the all-star bird dogger of this primary season. I don't know how many candidates you've been in front of, how many times you've gotten the question asked. Almost all of them. They know her by name. And she has gotten the question asked in videos up on questioner.us, our tracking website. So thanks for all your service, Kath. And you've got a final question?
Yes. Actually, comment. 2 bills that really teed me off that I heard about this week. One is any paperwork that we want from any entity in the state of New Hampshire, there's a bill up, we'll have to pay a fee no matter what it is. And I find that offensive to walk in and pay $15 to look at any genealogy research when our ancestors established this country.
Yeah.
And the other bill, maybe people won't be annoyed about, is legalizing prostitution, and I'm adamantly against it. They said it's a problem, so we'll legalize it. Instead of going at the source to fix the economic problems, they want to get money out of legalizing prostitutes.
Thank you, Kath. A closing comment from
my
Hedrick
closing
Smith.
comment is, it doesn't matter what the issue is, the cost of paperwork, genetically modified products, whatever it is, it's people power that matters. So be the new generation of agitators, and I'm not talking about age. Any generation can be part of the current generation of agitators. Take it away, New Hampshire, the rebellion.
Thank you, Hedrick Smith. Check out that website. Check out the book.
Reclaim the American Dream.
Reclaim the American Dream. Thank you, Hedrick. You've walked with us many miles. You've been a leader in the movement. 2 years ago at this time, he was speaking at our culmination in Nashua.